And here, in the present time, the new millennium has given us such opportunities. What else do I actually want to talk about? So to speak, I want to share some examples of healing, let's say, with our product. These are examples from the past 25 years. Of course, there have been quite a few complicated diseases. Well, I will take the most indicative cases among them. For example, let's say Parkinson's disease. That is, this disease actually isn't cured by our medicine. Yes, medicine maintains the condition, provides some effectiveness, but nevertheless, people still have tremors. And so to speak, with my method, within 6 to 8 months, a person can be given the opportunity for practically a new life. That is, he stops being, so to speak, in the kind of stressful state in which he constantly finds himself with this disease. And all of that disappears. Literally, the first results can be seen after just a month or two, and afterwards the problem disappears completely. After that, it only needs to be used once every 6 months for prevention. Why does my remedy still need to be used preventively once every 6 months? Because it is a very good remedy that cleanses the body as well as the blood, the vessels, and everything else. That's why it's recommended to use it periodically, but that's only if there are no illnesses anymore. However, if there is something, it disappears very quickly. For example, let's take spring and autumn. These are the most suitable periods when we have flu conditions and other similar issues. Here, it provides the opportunity, so to speak, to eliminate any viral tensions, regardless of whether you've got the flu or some other illness, it doesn't matter. Today, if your immune system is in good shape, the body can always handle such situation. That's why if you literally start taking it 2 weeks before the flu season, just for 2 weeks, that will be enough to avoid, let's say, the 5 days of, so to speak, discomfort with the flu. In other words, instead of being bedridden with the flu, everything can literally be cured within a single day. Why? Because the elixir is taken both internally and externally. That means in the nose, in the mouth, and in the eyes. So when you have chlorine in your throat, that is, you need to eliminate it. Usually this issue is resolved here as well. That's why, as I said before, in a comprehensive approach from a common flu or some cold acute respiratory infections to more serious illnesses, like let's take oncology as an example. Although, of course, as I already said, and I'll repeat it again, I don't want, so to speak, to get into any kind of confrontation with conventional medicine. I am simply providing assistance, that is, when the same, so to speak, anti-tumor procedures or remedies are applied. If my preparation is also used additionally, the effectiveness will be much higher and everything will go better, more smoothly. In other words, there will be no cytokine storms or, so to speak, various complex problems that arise during chemotherapy and all the rest. But if only my preparation is used, then in a short period of time it is actually possible to achieve control over the process, that is to stop the process, and after that, so to speak, the tumor begins to shrink, and it does so very intensively. Why? Because at this point the body's reserve forces are activated, and this has a very, so to speak, beneficial and highly restorative effect on the person's overall condition. That's why I've been involved with all kinds of oncology cases for a long time, but now I'm trying to step back from it to some extent because, you know, everyone thinks there's nothing better than modern medicine. But again, I want to say that I'm not trying to get into any conflicts or to sway anyone or try to. If someone wants help, by all means, we can help. In my experience, there have been cases where even the doctors had already given up. I'll give you such an example. The person was in stage 4 and they were told you have 2 or 3 weeks left, so to speak, and the relatives should start preparing. But in this person's case, it was about the thyroid gland, but not just the thyroid tumor. There was no thyroid gland at all. That is, at the level of the throat, there was a gaping hole and blood was constantly flowing out. Of course, the sight was not a pleasant one, but literally 3 weeks later, he went to the doctor, showed his throat, and the doctor was astonished. That is, in the place of the gaping hole, within a week, new skin had already formed and everything had healed. And the man calmly, so to speak, went through all these examinations, was given a second-degree disability, and in fact he lived for quite a long time after that. That is, well, he lived for about 3 or 4 years. Why? Because in such a situation, after he had already undergone chemotherapy, I think it was 12 or 14 times, and before that he had radiation and everything else. In other words, his body was already exhausted and, so to speak, no longer had the strength to hold on. Besides that, he was over 60 years old. That's why it was very difficult. If I have to give more examples, I can say that the medication works for various nervous disorders. That is, this includes both common neuroses and, for example, schizophrenia and similar conditions. In other words, we conducted such trials. So to speak, it is clear that this was done by mutual agreement with both the doctors and the patient. Why? Because there are cases where the doctors can't do anything. First of all, many people cannot be given various psychotropic drugs because allergies and other side effects may occur. There were several such cases and we solved these problems. Even the medical professionals themselves turned to us and said that they were unable to help because whatever psychotropic drug they administered, it caused such an allergic reaction that it could even lead to cardiac arrest. That's why we used our preparation, and there were several cases that, so to speak, were successful with us. Later, we tested it on other patients as well. Yes, everything showed excellent results. That's why we are working specifically in this direction. The next area is the fight against ischemic heart disease and, let's say, various heart attacks and similar conditions. That is, this always works quickly, right? Literally one drop of the elixir under the tongue with a little water, because it is very thick. That's why it needs to be diluted in advance, 1 part to 3 with water, and literally just one drop, those 3 drops of water under the tongue, and practically any crisis can be managed. So these are some heart diseases, including serious ones like strokes and similar conditions. By the way, regarding stroke, I can tell you that the brain hemorrhage is a very serious, so to speak, stress for the body. In such cases, surgery is usually required, but if, so to speak, the hemorrhage is small, they generally try to manage it in some way using various methods, but in practice, this is very difficult. My preparation makes it possible to resolve all these problems literally within a week or two, and if in the first hours or not even hours, but literally minutes a person is given a single drop of the preparation. I had such cases among my friends who already knew how to use the elixir. In particular, there was such a case with the wife of a friend of mine. She had a stroke, her right side, so to speak, and her face became distorted and everything else that comes with it. He gave her 1 drop mixed with 3 drops of water. Then 5 minutes later, gave her another dose and called an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived, and after about 25 minutes, everything was fine with. That is literally after 10 minutes, all her muscles tightened up. In other words, all of this, so to speak, shows that there is effectiveness in dispersing, so to speak, a hemorrhage in the brain. There was also a case where, so to speak, this had already happened, and there were large blood clots with a diameter of about 35 to 45 millimeters, about the size of a quail egg. And literally within a week, even the neurosurgeons themselves were amazed at how this was happening. Everyone always notices and says, it has a strange smell, it smells like grass, hay, and things like that. Well, yes, of course, when grass is concentrated and everything else, it does have such an unusual smell, but the effect is simply amazing. That is, literally in 7 days, for example, it would shrink from 36 millimeters down to the size of a pea, and then it would be absorbed. In such cases, there is no need to perform surgery at all. In other words, any surgery is very complicated. After that, the preparation shows good results in the treatment of all kinds of eye diseases. That is, this includes restoring vision and extends to conditions such as cataracts, clouding of the eye, and various others. In fact, all of this can be treated within a few months, and there is no need for any intervention in the eye, such as lens replacement or anything else. The only thing I always recommend them, there have been many cases, is that if the retina detaches, then yes, the retina needs to be reattached, and after that, my elixir should be used. This is for the healing process, because when an eye operation is performed, the incisions are made with a laser, and so to speak, the outer layer of the eye is lifted, and all the procedures are carried out there. After that, it's as if small stitches are placed, but these are not stitches. Actually, small dots are made with the laser, and they are fused together, and that's all. After that, despite everything, there should still be a scar. But here, all of that dissolves. There are no issues. Now, regarding the scars, let's say there are some old scars there. I mean, the ones that have been there for a long time. All of that is resolved when using the elixir. That is both in men and in women. Surprisingly, everyone notes that after a month, 2 or 3, this inevitably smooths out. In other words, those surfaces that were uneven and unsightly, all of that disappears. What remains is just something like a white thread, similar to the whitish lines women get when they have stretch marks on their skin. So in this regard as well, good results are observed. Next, regarding fractures, this is truly astonishing and definitely remarkable. Literally, if someone has had a fracture, even an old one, it disappears and on the bones there remain. What is the correct medical term for this? These are irregularities, the so-called bone calluses. And these bone calluses seem to close the ends of the fracture. And if you look at an X-ray, it's a white thread-like stripe indicating that there was a fracture. And this can be seen for up to about 10 years, and then it gradually heals. The bone calluses are removed within 5 to 10 years. Here, however, this happens literally within a few months. In other words, within half a year, all of this disappears, including that thread-like line. We are present online. There is a online store, and it's very easy to find us through a search engine. Nowadays, there are no difficulties at all, so feel free to reach out. We will help and offer advice. I wish everyone health, success, and all the best. Goodbye.